Trigger warning, this podcast contains mature themes and discussions of cults, manipulation, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults and human trafficking, where we expose the dark side of control, manipulation, and the human stories behind them. I'm Anonymous Andrew, executive producer and investigator into cult dynamics and coercive control.
And I'm Melody, a cult survivor and advocate for awareness and healing.
This is Cultimatum. Welcome back to another episode of Cultimatum Podcast, a culture of cults and human trafficking. And I am excited today because we have a very, very special guest, Melody. My co-host is with me today. Melody, who do we have on the show today?
Andrew, today we are joined by Dr. Darrell Ray, founder and president of Recovering from Religion and the Secular Therapy Project. Born into a fundamentalist religious family, Dr. Ray became a lifelong student of religion and went on to build a career as a psychologist with more than 30 years' experience. He's also the author of 2 influential books about the effects of religion on society and sexuality. His work has helped countless people understand religious influence and navigate life beyond it. We're so honored to have him here with us today. Dr. Ray, welcome to Cultimatum.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome. Well, what an intro. And I'm glad that we have Doctor as an expert on cults. And boy, do we need one. So, but Melody, I'm going to let you drive this one. All right.
Okay. Well, I guess for listeners who might not know yet, what originally led you to the study of religion, belief, sexuality, and the psychological harm that some of that stuff can cause?
Well, have you got 3 or 4 hours? Because it might take me that long.
Can we get the short version?
I'll try to give you the elevator speech. But early in I was raised in I would call a semi-fundamentalist family. However, my grandparents on my dad's side were very fundamentalist, so I had that influence. My grandparents on the other side were reasonably fundamentalist, if there is such a thing. And my parents were conservative, but not jerks about it. So I had a great childhood, and I also got infected during that childhood with some crazy ideas about religion, of course, and especially about sexuality. So as I grew older and grew into my young adulthood, I kind of learned that not everything I was taught in Sunday school quite matched up. And I started asking some tough questions. Although I was pretty committed to helping people. So I ended up, I got a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology. Well, those two are bad things to major in if if you want to stay in religion, because they're going to learn all sorts of things about other religions, which I did. I read a bunch of comparative religion stuff in undergraduate, but I went on to a seminary at Scarrett College for Christian Workers and got my master's degree in religion. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, because I was studying systematic theology and other aspects of religion, and found it's all pretty much mental masturbation at the end. And I found this is not, after reading Paul Tillich's book that thick, probably 800 pages long, on systematic theology, I realized it's all crap. There's just nothing there. There's no there, so to speak. After reading that whole book, I didn't feel like I knew any more at the end of the book than I had at the beginning of the book. And that was part of my journey downhill. I was still involved and married to a fairly religious woman. She's pretty liberal, as was I. And, as we went along in the 1980s, I finished my doctorate in 1970s, and then I got into my clinical practice. And I was having to work with lots of people that were dealing with what we now call religious trauma. But at the time, we didn't call it that. We didn't know what it was. No, there was no label for it. And it oftentimes centered around sex and sexuality, and how much people felt damned and condemned for just being humans sexually. And all that caused me to ask a whole lot of questions about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing in society. which led me in the early 2000s to start writing my book, The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. And I would submit that what we're seeing right now with the religious right, I, s- I, s- I got my degree, I started working, and I realized I needed to write a book about this.
Well,
So I,
I did want to ask you a question. You said something about sexuality. Do you remember what you said about that? What and you were
as I grew older and learned about my own sexuality and learned as a psychologist what human sexuality really was, it caused a lot of cognitive dissonance, I guess you could say, in my own mind.
But this wasn't anything to do with sexuality in the cults, like the abuse. This was just your experience growing up.
Uh, yes and no. No, because I wasn't subjected in a cult. However, in the churches that were affiliated, the independent Christian churches in Wichita, Kansas, where I grew up, there were 8 different ministers who got caught having sex with people they shouldn't have been having sex with. And there was, in the Boy Scout troop that I was in, the leaders of the Boy Scout troop were caught
Yep,
molesting young boys. I did
yep.
not get molested, but I knew
Sa-
the boys were.
Same here
So,
in New York.
so
I had the
all,
same thing. The Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts.
yep, yep. So, but these were Protestant churches and these were Protestant ministers, and they all got caught with their pants down, so to speak, all men, of course. And not one of them got fired for it. Not one. The only minister that actually got fired was one that they caught embezzling money as well.
Wow.
You got to, yeah.
They can
Can I
prosecute
swear?
that.
I didn't care you fuck, but don't steal money from somebody. That was kind of the lesson. But see,
Well,
so
from
go
my
ahead.
understanding, all the churches when they caught the priest diddling the altar boys or having affairs or whatever, they swept it under the rug. They moved that priest to a different parish or that minister, or they sent him out somewhere where he can't be seen, heard. And at least the Catholic Church did this. That's why you never saw anybody being prosecuted, except if something financially, like you brought up, like if he was extorting or if he was embezzling or whatever. Then, of course, they can prosecute him.
So anyway, I saw this what's the model? The model of the rule we were given is you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage and you shouldn't masturbate and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I'm seeing ministers violate these rules, and it causes a lot of questions come up in my mind. I wrote the God Virus, and to show how religion infects our lives and culture, and I deal with I talk about cults and cult issues within the book. But chapter 5 of that book was on sex and sexuality, and I got so much response from that single chapter. I mean, the book was a bestseller. It still sells today. I'm very pleased. It's 16 years old and it still sells today. But but that led me to think I need to write about sex and religion. So I wrote my book, Sex and God: How Religion Distorts Sexuality. From that, and those have been the themes of my career since about 2009, 2008, when first published the God Virus. But what I've seen is that virtually every cult, in fact, I've never studied a cult that didn't have bizarre sexual ideas. And by that, I mean nobody can have sex without permission of the cult leader, for example. Or the cult leaders get to have sex with anybody they want, but those people, but other people can't. Or they make bizarre rules up for that pretty much apply to everybody else, but not to the leaders. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not going on. But in almost any cult, there's some kind of bizarre sexual ideas about that violate fundamental human sexuality. Humans are not meant to be celibate, for example, and yet the Catholic Church enforces that on both priests and nuns. And I don't mean people who are asexual. That there's nothing wrong with being asexual, but people who are forced by the church to be celibate, that's going to cause problems. And cults, um, whether it's the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Scientologists. I mean, look at the head of the Scientology guy. He seems Miscavige. He seems to be able to have sex with anybody he wants, but they're very strict about sexuality. and especially against homosexuality within the Church of Scientology. I could go on, but I when I work with cult followers or victims of cults, every time there's sexual issues. It's
W-
sexual issues because they were violated, they were taught stupid things about sexuality. They were in crazy ideas were enforced upon people that suppress their normal development as sexual beings.
We can concur
Does
on
that
this
answer?
podcast. We're on like 90 some episodes, and I wouldn't say every interview has that, and not every guest has experienced some of that, but I would say a majority, definitely a majority. And it's possible that the ones that there's probably some we've had on that just don't share that part of their story as well. But we certainly see that to be the case. And it's always about sex, money, and power, or all three of those things, or at least some combination of those things when it comes to
Yep.
cults, for sure. I was curious, how would you define religious trauma, and in what ways does it differ from other forms of trauma?
Well, in the broad sense, trauma is um, is the response of the brain to a life-threatening or perceived life-threatening event that happens to the individual, um, and it's a response to an initial event, and then it perpetuates itself in the brain in the form of inappropriate responses to the environment. So, a common thing we all know about is trauma that was caused by war. If somebody is close to sees their fellow soldiers dying, for example, or there's a massive explosion very close to you, those kinds of things can cause trauma, and the brain responds appropriately at the time to protect you.
Right.
But it's imprinted on the brain so deeply, oftentimes, that subsequent years later, for example, fireworks goes off on the 4th of July and the person hits the ground as if they were being shot at. And that's an inappropriate response to the environment. That's the bigger picture of what trauma is. With religion, though, you get trauma created by the teachings of the church or the cult, and sometimes those are not different. Sometimes those are the same thing. And don't be fooled by whether an organization is called a cult or not, because many cult-like behaviors are used within other so-called more liberal or less cult-like environments. Catholic Church can behave very much like a cult in some parts of the world. We've got a group of Catholics 50 miles north of me. They're very, very devout Catholics. They're so devout that they have their own bishop, and he excommunicated the Pope about 10 years ago. So that's
Wow.
how is that a cult? I don't know, but they sure do have cult-like behaviors.
So,
So
Andrew,
that's
what I'm hearing is maybe you're a cult survivor after all. Andrew was raised Catholic. And
Catholic,
he always
yeah.
says he's not a cult survivor.
Well, I was not just raised Catholic. My father was in the Knights of Columbus. My mom was an ex. What do you call that? Where she gave out communion. There was a word for that. But she was one of the very first women who gave a communion out at Sundays. And I was an altar boy and a choir boy. And I always make this joke, and it's really not funny to make. But I was not molested. But a lot of the boys with me in my grade were, and I always felt like, why didn't they molest me? And it's a terrible joke, but it was like, what, why didn't you like me? And I have to apologize to anybody out there who has that trauma in their youth. But it's just funny how they the priests. I mean, I don't know how they pick their targets, their victims, and I just seem to have a perfect Catholic upbringing. I don't know if I want to call it perfect, but anyway,
Yeah.
you get the
So,
idea.
Melody, finish answering the question about religious trauma is when you are 3, 4, 5 years old, 6, 7 years old, you're being taught certain ideas about the way the world works. Your parents say, "Don't play in the street because you'll get hit by a car." Or if you live in a jungle in a hunter-gatherer society, they'll say, "Don't go over there into those bushes because the lions or hyenas will get you and eat you." And if you listen to your parents, if your ancestors listen to your parents, that's why you exist today, because those children listen to their parents. But what if those same parents, after telling you don't go in the bushes where the lions and hyenas are, told you don't go over underneath that tree because that's where the demons are, or don't go talk to the kids down the street who belong to a different church because they're satanic, then that's gonna be imprinted on your mind. If you're taught from a very early age that you go to hell for masturbating, for example, then a 12-year-old kid who's had it beat into their head that touching yourself will send you to hell now has night terrors about going to hell.
Okay,
Or
and I can attest to that because although we weren't told hell, we were told this is silly, but we were told that we masturbated, we would hair would grow on our palms. And I don't know why that would scare me. I guess I just didn't want hair on my palms.
it's clear evidence that you masturbated. That's what scares you.
Oh, okay.
Everybody will
So I
know.
guess I mean like the scarlet letter, right? I guess that would be like the
Exactly.
exactly.
Yes,
Okay,
Right,
makes
I
it
right.
get it.
obvious.
Yes.
Was
Okay.
told I was told, it would make you go blind, and so
That too. Yes, yes. I was told. So I didn't go blind, and I don't have hair on my palms. And I'll just leave it at that.
okay. So what happens is children grow up into adults, into young adults, and they carry these beliefs with them, and that leads to traumatic responses, being inappropriate responses to the environment. So if the person feels incredibly shamed or incredibly guilty because they find out they're gay, or they have attractions that are prohibited by the church, that creates an enormous conflict within them that can lead to traumatic responses. The other side of the coin is when people leave a cult, when people leave a religion, they may not realize they were traumatized within the religion, and they may not have been traumatized. I can't say for sure, but what I can say is when you leave that religion, you can lose your family, you can lose all your friends, you can lose your financial support, you can lose your social support system. You lose a lot of things when you leave many cults or many religions. And as a result, that creates religious trauma. Now, I would call it religious trauma because it's trauma directly related to religion. It's not trauma related to child abuse by non-religious parents, or not trauma related to a war event. It's trauma related to the ideology that you left. And that's insidious because it's not something that happened. You didn't just experience the explosion of a bomb one time in your life and that caused trauma. You've experienced constant beating of your brain that masturbation is wrong, sex outside of marriage is wrong. Thinking about an attractive person is committing adultery. Those kinds of things are right in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, and they're enforced within most of the sections of Christianity.
Well, and Melody, she tells this story often, and not the Christmas tree, but the one about working on Sabbath. So when she left
Yes.
her cult and got into the real world, and the job she got wanted her to work on Saturdays, she had so much anxiety. You tell her, Melody, how much anxiety
Yeah,
you had.
I had a full-blown panic attack. I literally just felt like I couldn't breathe. I started crying. I quit the job. I was because I was it was so ingrained in me that I really felt like if I go to work on Saturday, I'm gonna burn in hell. I believed that fervently, even though I had left the group, even though I'd been excommunicated from the group. And there was that moment there where I did think maybe I should just go back and this anxiety will go away. Luckily, I lived too far away to go back. I was 1,500 miles away from me. If I had lived closer, I might have gone back because of that anxiety. I'm glad that I was so far away. But I believe in hindsight, I think, oh, I was suffering from religious trauma.
You- Gosh, Melody, you've just given me a new case study. Everything you just said, I've been on. we're expanding all over the world. We're recovering from religion. I want to talk about what I do with them later, but right now, I had this. I was giving a talk around all of the United Kingdom and Ireland and Scotland last month in October rather, and everything you just mentioned, I use in several different case studies. You you had an inappropriate response to the environment. So
Yes.
that alone tells me you were experiencing a trauma response. That makes
Yes.
sense?
Oh, absolutely, and this was
And that
back in '94. I did try to get counseling, but I the counselor looked at me like he had no idea how to help me, and I knew he didn't know how to
Yeah, in
help me.
1994, there were no therapists
No.
that knew anything about cults, and that's a question I want to ask you. I'm sure you're familiar with the DSM, the Diagnostic Service Manual, and
statistical diagnostic and statistical manual.
statistical. Right? Is religious trauma from cult experience ever going to be? Because it is a real post traumatic stress disorder coming from religious trauma. Do you know if it's in there yet, or are they going to put it in there? I know you may not have a direct line to them, but
Well, yes, I do, and I don't. I have no power, no, but here's the thing. It's a fine line to explain. We already have all the evidence, all the criteria we need in the DSM-5 now. DSM is a compilation of symptoms that you look for. You know, if the person is having night terrors more than once a week for 3 months, that would tell me I'm just making that up. I'm not reading the DSM right now. But if somebody is having a recurring inappropriate response to their environment, that tells us there's probably trauma. Where the trauma comes from is somewhat irrelevant when it comes to the DSM. Right now, we can identify and diagnose trauma. That's all I need. The second thing I can do, and I don't need to have a DSM classification. If I'm turning it into insurance, I just say they have PTSD, and I put the criteria down and say they meet the criteria, so insurance will pay for it.
so it doesn't matter where it originated from.
It really doesn't, because you can have trauma coming from adverse childhood experiences that are not related to religion.
Correct.
You can have it coming from war. You can have it coming from a car accident. There's all sorts of places you can get trauma from. So I'm not. I know some people are concerned about that, but I'm not. Because we already have the tools to diagnose it, and we also have good treatment modalities for trauma. We do have to tailor it though, because as you said, the therapist didn't know how to help you. Well,
Right.
that tells in 1994 and 95, we didn't really know much about this, including PTSD. We had to go through the Afghan and Iraq war for that to really come to the fore. Now it had been experienced in Vietnam, of course, and other wars. In fact, every war since the American Revolution, well, no, going clear back to, we have evidence of war-related PTSD in Greece in the 400s.
Right.
So we
Right,
know it's been around. It's not
and
new
I
thing.
know at one point they did call it shell shock was another I would assume that was also, that same trauma, but that was the name they called it for a while.
In the Civil War, they called it soldier's heart. In
Mm,
World War One, they called it shell shock, and in World War II, they call it battle fatigue. Every war's had its own name,
Right.
but it's the same thing. So what we now have treatment modalities, and that's something I want to emphasize. Very There's a lot of therapists out there that don't have a clue how to treat religious trauma. And what we have done at Recovery from Religion is we've created 12 years ago or 13 years ago, we created a database of therapists who know how to deal with this stuff. And we created the databases. Right now, we're at 1,067 therapists in 11 different countries that are all certified to know how to deal with the kinds of issues people come to a therapist around religion. Many therapists are trained around just basic psychological issues. That's great, but they don't know how religion impacts the brain. They don't know how you can get trauma from religion. In fact, many therapists say, well, I go to church every Sunday and I'm not traumatized. Well, that tells you right there, you don't want to go to that therapist because they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah,
So, first
Melody?
of all, where can people find that list? And then
Oh,
also, do a lot of them or do a good portion of them offer online services if somebody's too far away?
yeah, yeah, you can go to you can go to, seculartherapy.org, seculartherapy.org. Go to the website and, register as a client, and you can register without giving you can use a fake name, you can create a different email. We try to protect people's anonymity, and then once you've registered, then you have to go into the site and search, and it'll say, "Do you wanna search within 50 miles or 100 miles?" And then you do the search, it'll bring up there's 4 therapists within 100 miles of you or 50 or whatever, and then you can reach out to and then you read their profiles. What is their
Okay.
specialty? And what is your problem? And see if you can find somebody that seems to match what you need. And we
Okay,
created this
very good. And we
because
will have
so
that link in the show notes just so everybody knows that will be there, so that people can go find that easily. Just literally just click on the link and it'll bring them right there. Um,
right, right. But you do
so
have to register. Some people think they can just hit the button, but you have to
mm,
register first because
okay,
it looks for your zip code and then it
okay,
searches around where your zip code is.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And it's a program, Secular Therapy Project is a program of recovering from religion, and both are international organizations.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Don't go anywhere. More Cultimatum is coming up. So, Doctor, I have a question, and I'm not sure if this was in your introduction. You help people who have come out of religious trauma cults, and all different from sexual abuse to emotional abuse to physical abuse. At what point in your career, in your so you're a PA, you're a psychologist. Where what was there one cult that you saw that was doing the most damage, or maybe like Jonestown, that you said, "I have to study this," or was there one that just the light switch went off and said, "This is what I wanna do. This is the career I wanna follow?"
And I've been studying religion since I was, 18 years old or earlier. Uh, to answer that question, I'm not sure there was 1, there was 50, there was 100, I don't know. There's a new cult popping up about every week, somewhere. If you read the
Especially
book
today because we have an online presence, so everybody's popping up on cults online now, like Twin Flames
Yeah,
universe. But back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was all, the Hare Krishna and the Moonies, and so I was just curious if there was any one particular one that you saw that was prevalent, and you were getting the most people coming forward that needed help. But I
Jehovah's
think
Witness Jehovah's Witnesses is probably hands down the number 1 cult that we deal with most.
no kidding,
We
and I'm
we
not
deal with
surprised at that.
Mormons, probably are number 2 or 3. We get a wide variety, though. We see almost no one from Scientology. We have had a few, but they're really rare.
Why
It's
do you think that is?
Well, there are not that many, and they're dying. Scientology's dying, but Jehovah's Witnesses are dying too. And as people are leaving and they're getting shunned by their families, they're having to deal with the trauma of losing their entire social support network.
So
We're
when
seeing
you
that here on our show too. Absolutely. I mean, Jehovah's
Yep.
Witnesses is our we have the most episodes of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses than any other group.
but you just said something, and we have tried to stay away from Scientology just for obvious reasons. But now maybe it's not. I don't. We don't have to. You say Scientology is dying. Are they really falling apart? Is it because of all the publicity?
Yep, they sure are, and they're no longer able to, legally challenge people like they used to. Go look at
Oh,
Chris Shelton. I would encourage you to actually have him on your show maybe because he is a ex-Scientologist, Chris Shelton out of Colorado. He actually
I know
does a good
Chris.
podcast.
I know
Okay.
Chris. He's
Well,
in my Facebook support group. I know him. Yep.
then I would encourage you to get him because he's very knowledgeable, especially about Scientology. And they pursued him. They tried to sue him and everything, and he won, got out of it. But he
Good.
has a horror story to tell that I think you'll find interesting and helpful.
So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when Leah Remini did her thing, and they went after her, and I think there was another handful of a half a dozen celebrities that came out and told about Scientology. They did try to shut them down and quiet them, and they intimidated them. You're saying that they're not doing that anymore, or they
Yeah,
just
there's too many people criticizing them. They can't sue them all.
they can't sue them all. No.
No,
Okay.
and they failed. They failed miserably in what they did try to do. By the way, Leah
That's
Remini
good
did
to
that
know.
series on she did that Scientology series, and once she finished that, then she did a second series. Most people don't know about it. She had a second series on Jehovah's Witnesses, and if you watch that, it's a documentary. It's on YouTube. If you watch that documentary, there's a panel of 6 or 7 people that they interview on a stage. And if you look at the person on the extreme right, her name is Shanna. She is the secretary of our board now. When she did the documentary many years ago with Leah Remini, we didn't know her, but since that time she's joined Recovering from Religion, and she's now been one of our board members for like 6 or 7 years. She's a great, great example of someone recovering from a cult, from the
I'm gonna
Jehovah's
Interesting.
have to
Witnesses.
go find that, look that up and find that because I watched all of the aftermath, with Leah Remini, but I had not heard about this Jehovah's Witness documentary. I'm curious now. I would really like to see that.
I think it's only one episode, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
Wow.
powerful.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a powerful episode.
Yeah. When it came out, we got inundated with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
yeah, I bet.
If you're not aware of this book, you should read it. It came out in 1955. It was published by Leon Festinger. You've heard of the term cognitive dissonance?
Yes.
Well, Leon
Yes.
Festinger, before he invented that term, had already investigated a Chicago cult, outer space cult, that he got wind of this cult that was starting up, and was able to infiltrate the cult with some of his graduate students. And as a result of that, they got to watch the whole cult develop from start until many years later, when the prophecy did not happen. And then he wrote a book about it, and the book is called "When Prophecy Fails," and I think you can get it for like $1
This
on.
this wasn't Heaven's Gate.
No, 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 it's much earlier than Heaven's Gate, but
Okay.
it's very similar to Heaven's Gate. So when the prophecy failed, that did not kill the cult. In fact, the cult became stronger for some people. And you see that phenomena among cults
Thank
over and
you.
over again.
The so, I just asked this question last night, and I ask it on every on every episode that we have a guest, for example, the Seventh-day Adventist or any doomsday cult. And I know, Melody, there's an answer for this, but I'd like to hear doctor's response on this. When they say that the world's gonna end on this date, and it doesn't happen, and then they push the date 2 years, it's gonna happen on this day, and then I understand now they no longer do dates, they just tell you what the event is gonna be because they're running the people are just tired of the dates not coming true, the prophecies not coming true. My thing was that if I was in a cult and for 10 years and they kept telling me the world's gonna end on July 1st and July 1st comes and goes, at some point I would just say, "This is a crock of bull." And I'd walk away, but I'm being told by Melody and many of the other people are saying that they're so brainwashed, indoctrinated that they just keep believing this. What's your
I don't know if you're familiar with Millerites and other groups similar to them. That's where the
yes,
Jehovah's Witness came from. Well, they've been predicting the end of the world up. I think the major first prediction was 1914, which, World War One started. But time after time, those dates have not come. Some people have this common sense to realize, oh, it must be a fake, and they leave.
right?
There's always a core that sticks around, and there's a psychological reason for that. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. Now, that comes from economics. if you put a lot, it's like I'm going to buy this house and I'm going to start putting money into it. Then I find out that the house needs a lot more work on
Work.
it. I
Yeah.
just keep putting money and more money and more money into it, and I can't admit that I made a bad decision. Get out while the good getting's good. It's called the sunk in economics. It's called sunk cost fallacy. In gambling, you go in, you've gambled $500. You know you're going to hit the jackpot, so you just keep going till you've lost $1,000 and you've not won anything, but you keep going. That's sunk cost fallacy. Surely I'm going to win if I just keep going. Religion does that to our brains. It says the reward is here. You just have to keep pushing, keep believing. You have to have more faith, and that seems to work. More faith keeps you in the
And that
business.
reward is when the world ends, you're going to be one of the 144,000 souls that get to go up into heaven or wherever they
Right,
promise you. Right. Okay.
right.
Well,
Okay. I
thank
see.
you
I
for
never heard it.
finally explaining that to Andrew.
And now that makes sense. I mean, it does align with the indoctrination. So I know that some people are so buried so deeply into these cults that they're straight up lying to them, and they just don't see it. It's right in front of their face, and they just don't see it. But the way that Dr. Ray just explained it, it does make more sense to me now. So thank you.
It work it works in political systems, it works in religious systems, it works in economic systems because it's related to how our brain works. And as long as our brain can convince us that there's a reward at the end, we will keep doing it. Pigeons, if you've seen the behavioral experiments of B.F. Skinner in the 1950s, he could convince pigeons to peck a button and they would get a reward. Well, then they stopped giving it every time and just maybe every third time, and then maybe only every fifth time, and then maybe only randomly until they stopped giving the reward, but yet the pigeon kept hitting the button until the pigeon literally pecked his own bill off. He would damage himself trying to get the reward. So it's not just humans, it's animals too. You can
It's
train
innate
animals.
into the biological. So
Right.
would this be the same principle with an alcoholic or an addict who's constantly chasing that high, even though that very first high was the best high, but he'll never get that second, third, fourth, or whatever? Because I'm in recovery, so I'm familiar with that concept.
Um, well, that's a whole nother question, and that involves neurological impacts from the drugs themselves. I would not go there. It's not related to religion.
And no,
although
so
although I will say this, Alcoholics Anonymous is another religion. 8 of the 12 steps are religious, and it teaches learned helplessness. It teaches some really stupid, bad ideas about how you change your life. If you're an AA, I'm sorry, but
no,
that's, uh, that's what I've observed, and I like to let people know there's alternative ways of recovery that do not involve AA.
yeah.
Good
Well,
good secular
you are
side.
correct. The word God appears in 8 of the 12 steps.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
so it
it's
has
been
to be
brought.
a religion.
Yeah,
There's no science. There was no scientist invented AA, and there's been no scientific validation of the
yeah.
method.
Okay.
However, there are 3 other ways you can recover from alcoholic or other things that are scientifically validated, but that's not what
Well,
we're here to talk about.
and not to belabor the point, but many people have stayed out of AA just because of that. And me too, because I was clean and sober back in the 90s. I relapsed and I would not go back because I was an agnostic or atheist. And I would not go back to the 12 steps because I didn't want to deal with the God the concepts. And so anyway, we're getting off the cult topic here, but all right, excellent, excellent. Thank you for putting that in perspective for me.
I'm
I
glad
have
to.
another question. I think I know the answer, but I want to hear your answer. I mean, I have my own version of the answer for this, but what do you think makes people vulnerable to joining cults and what keeps them there?
Melody, that's a great question, and, I'll just say to plug my own book, The God Virus, I actually talk about that very thing and why people are susceptible. Now let's go back and ask, when does religion infect people? It almost always, not always, but almost always infects them when they're infants, when they're young, when they're most susceptible to irrational ideas because their brain is not developed enough to be able to challenge these ideas. Number one way that you infect a person with religion is get them while they're young. And the Jesuits talked about this 1,000 years ago. Said, "Give me the boy till 7, I'll give you the man." If we can indoctrinate a person when they're that young, then we will probably have them for the rest of their life. And they will be afraid to leave because of the things we've already talked about in terms of religious trauma response to the
Right.
environment. However, there's a second time that people are susceptible to religious infection. And I first noticed this years ago. I was working in I was a consultant, organizational psychologist for a good deal of my career. And I would work with engineering departments. Well, if you know anything about engineers, they're usually really, really bright. They're very good at analytical kinds of stuff. And I
Yes.
had this one guy that I was working in the organization with this one engineer, and he was just a real he and I really liked each other. We got along. And one day his father got cancer, and they went through a very difficult 6 months of him dying. And at the end, he died. I found out he died. The next time I saw him, my friend was a totally changed person. And he would told me that Jesus had saved him, and Jesus had done this, and he couldn't open his mouth without telling me what Jesus had done. This was a person who was a functional agnostic, if not an atheist, before his father died. So what it tells us is when a person's brain is under a high degree of stress, and that could be from social stress or it can be from physical or mental stress, then they're very susceptible to infection. And that's why I like the notion of religion as an infection, a neurological infection as opposed to a biological infection. Because when when you are most susceptible to getting a cold, it's when your immune system is already down. You're tired. You're working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week or something. That's
Right.
when your body's immune system is susceptible to being infected. And religion does exactly the same thing. It's most likely
Ah,
to infect you. And that's how cults work.
yes.
Almost every person I've ever talked to that was a that was not born in the Jehovah's Witness cult tells this story. Jehovah's Witnesses came and knocked on my door one day right after my mother died, or right as I was dealing with a serious, I just gotten laid off, or something like that. Some major life event happened, and they came and knocked on my door and showed me how Jesus or Jehovah's Witnesses could help me, and I joined them, and I stayed in for 30 years, and now I'm out. But in the meantime, they were susceptible to Jehovah's Witness infection. And the same
Mm,
story comes from Mormons too. A lot of Mormons I've met that were not born in the church. Remember, that's the number one infection strategy is children. But the number two is catch them while they're vulnerable, while they're sick, while they're in stress, while they
yep.
lost your job. There's a lot of reasons. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely, and we do talk about that on the show and the podcast. I mean, any point of even transition, like even college students starting to college, they move away from their families and they're vulnerable because they're away from home for the first time, and cults will go after college students. So it's yes, yes, that definitely answers my question, and I agree 100%.
Piggyback on that, Melody. I'm glad you brought that up because life transitions are a stressful time. And probably the most significant life transition for a teenager is going from high school to college. And that's why so many churches put so much time and money into things like Crew, the evangelical Christians. You go to a college these days and you look in September when the clubs are just getting started, for every regular club, like the Engineers Club or Shakespeare's Club, for every one of those, you'll see one or two evangelical signs on the same campus. I speak a lot on college campuses, and I oftentimes speak in the fall when those are happening. I'm just shocked at dozens and dozens of advertisements for religious groups on college campuses because that's a stressful time and it's a great time to infect people with that religious
Yes,
ideology.
and
I'm
I
sorry,
think
go
that
ahead.
should be I think that should be illegal. I think that they shouldn't be able to be advertising there. I mean, the colleges shouldn't allow it because of just exactly what you're saying. This is a time when somebody is vulnerable and they're taking advantage of that specific situation and looking for victims. I'm going to say looking for victims.
Yep, they are. Yeah. Well, I would agree. I would like it to make it illegal, but that's kind of a slippery slope in terms of
It
our
is.
First Amendment rights. So,
Right?
I have a question. Your book called The God Virus, that's the name of the book?
right, yeah.
Okay. And this is probably, I'm sorry to ask this because I'm sure you have, but have you heard of the book, The God Delusion?
Hell yeah. In fact, I even credit Richard Dawkins in my foreword.
Oh, there you
Yep.
go. Okay.
I and I met Richard Dawkins a number of times, and, I'm even in one of his documentaries.
Excellent. Okay. One
Yeah.
of my favorite all-time books. It's like
Hell yeah.
number 2 on my list.
One of my number 1 on my list is my own book, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I would put Dawkins up there in number 2 or 3. I like Hitchens, I like Dennett, I like Harris, I like all the so-called 4 horsemen. In fact, I read all of the 4 horsemen, Dennett, Harris, Dawkins, and, Harris, yeah. I read all 4 of them, and then when I finished reading all 4 of them, I said, "There's something really important missing here, and that is the psychological angle." Dennett is a philosopher. Dawkins is a biologist. Harris is a neurologist. I show my Hitchens is a journalist. There's no psychologist in there. And so that's what inspired me to write The God Virus, because it's a look from the psychological angle of how people get infected with. And you'll notice the subtitle of the book is How People Get Infected, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. And if you look at the MAGA movement right now, to get political, it looks like a cult. And yes, there are political cults. Don't be fooled. All cults are not religious. We can have in a religious cult when Trump says I could stand out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not lose any voters, and he gets elected twice. That tells you we got a cult, because the leader can do no wrong. Kim Jong Il, Jong Il in North Korea cannot do anything wrong. Putin in Russia cannot do anything wrong. Those are cults. They're political cults, though, that are actually controlling entire countries and cultures.
But this well, first I want to ask you a question. We discussed this at the beginning of the episode. I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what we can interview you with. I'd like to do a part 2 with you. So I'd like to know if we can invite you back to do more, because there's just so much more I'd like to ask you. And because the more you talk, the more questions I have. The MAGA political discussion you just brought up, my using Dr. Hassan's, and I don't know if we've even brought that name up with you yet.
Oh, I know.
His,
Yeah, I know Dr. Hassan. Yeah.
the let's say, how do I say this without saying it? Let's just hypothetically say that somebody voted for Trump, and he was voted in twice. All right, so let's say one of them he did, one of them he didn't, and but now he's realized that that was a dumb thing to do because he's an idiot, right? But yet he's still affiliated with the Republican Party. Is that person in a cult, or is Trump the cult leader, and that person is Pimo, physically out or physically in, but mentally, yeah? Do you understand what I'm saying? Well, so if MAGA is a cult, but a Republican who might have voted for him doesn't drive around with flags on their cars and with MAGA signs in there, because around New York you get these wacky people driving with MAGA stuff all over their and still wearing the hats. But the cults that we know of, the religious cults, are the ones that the horrible ones, like JW and the House of Yahweh. And do you see where I'm going? So you use the term political cult, religious cult. Is there a difference? is it because of the nuances in between?
Well, they both. uh, I wasn't
I
intending to
can
get a.
I can walk away if I walked away from JW, if I'm a Jehovah's Witness and I walk away, I'm gonna be shunned, and I'm gonna be and I can't talk to my family who's still in. So, let's say I have a sister and a brother and a father who's still in JW, but I decide I'm out, and they won't talk to me now because I've been shunned. But if I say to somebody, I voted for Trump, but you know what? I made a mistake, and you can't take that vote back. But I'm no longer supporting him, and I think he's an idiot, and I can't wait to the next election. What is that? Am I in that cult? There's a big difference between leaving JW and getting shunned, and you can't talk to your family, to saying, "Well, yeah, I made a mistake by voting for Trump. Now I left." I know I'm using I just I'm not saying I did. Between JW, an ex-JW, and an ex-Trumper.
Well, they both probably are recovering from something. If you look at, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene just left the cult, so to speak, and she's getting death threats. I guess a lot of death threats. Well, that's kind of like being shunned. I know. We deal with families. I haven't talked about recovering from religion, but we have a chat line, international chat line. You can call us or chat with us from anywhere on the planet, and we've got trained volunteers that can help you deal with your religious trauma as a peer, not as a therapist. We'll refer you to the Secular Therapy Project if you need a therapist. But as you call in, we get thousands of people calling us saying, I no longer believe in the evangelical religion that my parents forced on me, and they're all MAGA as well. Evangelical Christianity and MAGA are the Venn diagram of those two overlaps 98% probably. So when you leave the MAGA cult and you leave the evangelical church, you lose your family. We have people calling us up saying I got fired when I told my boss. We had one person say I took my Trump sticker off my car. My boss asked me why I did that. I told him I know I think the guy's an idiot or something like that, and I got fired. It was a small family business, but he got fired because he challenged the cult. Now, I've been around politics my whole life. My dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat, or I'm sorry, it's the other way around. I never dreamed of one of them, or they would have never dreamed of shunning me because I didn't believe. But that's what's going on. You can see the clear evidence of cult-like behavior. But even in cults, there's the outer shell, the middle shell, and the inner shell. The outer shell people are not fully into the cult yet, and they can come and go. But the next shell in is more committed, and the internal shell, that's that 20, 25% that are devoted to that cult leader under any circumstances. They may even die for the cult leader. But
Okay.
that's true whether it's a political cult or a religious cult.
I guess that's the big difference. I guess maybe that's where I'm not. I'm just trying to discern or make a distinction between those two, and you can't unless you use the word political cult and religious cult, and then of course then there's spiritual cults and online cults and
Well,
yoga cults and
keep in mind that, at least in the case we're talking about here, evangelical Christianity and MAGA overlap. They're a part of the same phenomena. You go into an evangelical. I live in Kansas. You go into an evangelical church, look at the parking lot, you'll see Trump stickers everywhere. You will not see a Harris sticker during the election. You would not find a Harris sticker anywhere. And if you did have a Harris sticker, your car would be marked in some way, shape, or form. Rather than is that a cult or not? Sounds like it to me.
it's cult-like behavior. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
Certainly.
okay.
And especially if you have your religion telling you or suggesting to you how to vote.
yeah, yeah. That's why we had the Johnson Amendment that is not being enforced at all the last 10 or 15 years. That said, a church minister cannot endorse a candidate or a party. They're doing it willy nilly now, even though it's clearly illegal. Nobody's
Mm.
enforcing that particular
Nobody's
law
enforced.
in the
Plus,
United
they could do
States.
it on social media. They could do it any different. They could. Yeah, I get. I haven't been to a church in years, so I have no idea what's going on inside any of the churches, including the Catholic ones. Doctor, we're up on an hour. Would you come back and because I there's so much more, Melody, I think that we have, and we didn't even get to how he treats and helps the ex cult members. We just got warmed up with that.
Yeah, yeah. No, we could definitely do another episode.
All right, everybody, Doc, I would like to
Well,
say,
could
go
I
ahead,
make
Doc.
could I make one final comment?
Sure, sure.
If you need help, you need somebody to talk to, you want to meet other ex-cult members, go to recoveryfromreligion.org and hit the chat button or call in on our phone line. We have people that will talk to you. More importantly, we've got groups. We've got 65 groups all around the planet that meet almost every day of the week, either by Zoom or even face to face. We got face to face meetings in some cities, but we got lots of Zoom meetings, and you can talk to other people who are going through the same thing.
And you're based where?
We're international.
Okay,
I live in Kansas. Our executive director lives in Oregon. We have board members
okay.
in France, Australia, Mexico. We're really international. So
Did,
Awesome,
see,
and we will
see,
have
this is
that link
this,
in the show notes too.
and see, I have more questions. Like, do you run support groups for people, like online
yes,
virtual support? See that? Okay,
absolutely. Well trained media or
yeah,
leaders. Support
like
groups. Yeah.
facilitators, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Right.
all right. It's questions like that that I'd like to do in part two because
Okay.
there's so many. All right, everybody. Dr. Darrell Ray, thank you for joining. This is part one. So everybody, stay tuned for part two. And Doc, thanks very much for coming on.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
thank you. We appreciate it.
Good.
And once again, we want to thank Dr. Ray for coming on the show and giving us so much knowledge and information. And we already scheduled the time, and we're hoping he's going to be back. And that episode should be within the next 2 or 3 weeks. But because he is a wealth of information and knowledge, um,
Un Unbelievable. Yeah.
yes,
And when you told me he was coming on, of course, I didn't know much about him and I didn't do the research, which we tell the audience that you surprised me with the guests just
yes,
for the shock value and and how I'm going to respond to them. But in this case, I'm going to call out myself and say that I probably should have looked up Dr. Ray and done a little research. But with that said, he did a very, very good job at explaining to what he does
yes,
with the religion. He helped. Basically, he is anti-cult, anti-religion, anti-God, and will help you deconstruct in some way,
yes.
form. Right? Is that
Yes, I
basically
would
what he
think that's
does?
pretty accurate, and I mean, I think that's what the website Recovering from Religion is focused on, and certainly and I love that sunk cost fallacy. I'm gonna try to remember that term about
Yes.
because that's
Yes.
the one that because I know you're gonna bring it up again, Andrew. Why do people
I
stay?
know.
Why do people
I know.
stay? And I can
Yeah.
tell you from my experience in my cult, that was the case with a lot of people. When you sell everything you own and especially the people that move down there, they literally sell their houses. And my parents sold their
Mm.
house when we were in the cult. They didn't move down there. They sold the house they owned and they started renting so that they could move quickly if
Well,
they
and
needed
it's
to.
funny. You asked him why do people join cults. So my question
Yeah.
would follow up would be why do people sell their houses, sell their cars, sell their property, move halfway across the country so they can live in a trailer on somebody's back, in a
Yeah.
park someplace, and follow some blind, not blind, but like some
Yeah.
man that they have no idea, but just because he gave you a pamphlet and said that you're going to be one of the 144. I Anyway, we don't have to discuss this now. I loved Dr. Ray's interview. I
Yes.
his even with the AA thing, I'm not going to debate him on that.
Yeah.
AA keeps me sober. I'm 10 years sober plus, but he's got a point with the 8 steps have the word God, but it's the
Right.
lowercase g, by the way. I have to
Oh.
look at that. It may
Oh.
not be. And it's followed by the words God as we understand him. So it's
Yes.
not the God of the Catholic Church, not the God of the Jewish Church. It's
Right.
God as do I understand him. But
Which could be your higher power, whatever it
my
is you
higher
believe
power could
in,
be the
yes.
sun. And
Yeah.
when I did join AA, I made the sun my higher power because it was
Mm,
greater than myself. So
mm.
anyway, thanks, Dr. Ray. We're gonna have part two, like Melody said.
Yes,
We're gonna
very soon.
record that soon, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. So once again, thank you to Dr. Ray. And as always, thank you to all of you for tuning into Cultimatum. We always appreciate your support in our mission to expose the truth and highlight the voices of survivors.
If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple and Spotify, and don't forget to follow, share, and keep listening to all of our latest episodes.
And you can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and YouTube for more content and updates.
Don't forget to join our Facebook group, Cultimatum Podcast, where we dive deeper into these important topics.
And if you are a cult survivor and you're looking for additional support, you can join the Cult Escape and Healing group on Facebook.
If you're interested in more of my work, check out my other two podcasts, Digital Dating and The Weekend Rant, or just head over to the anonymousandrewpodcast.com website, which will have all of the podcasts there, including Cultimatum and a blog and a bunch of other stuff.
And if you have a story related to cults or human trafficking that you'd like to share with us, please email us at cultimatumpodcast@gmail.com.
Would you like to support the show? I would like you to help us if you can. Go into the show notes and you'll see a link that says buy us a cup of coffee. You click on that and you can donate $5 or $10. Buy Melody a cup, buy me a cup. Obviously, it's not literally a cup of coffee, but it will donate to the show. And thank you for those who have donated so far, because people have, and we want to give you thanks.
Absolutely. We do appreciate that. And as always, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, you are not alone.